All right, tonight I'm going to talk to you about a new knife that I got and compare that to a knife that I got not too long ago. But before then, I'm going to start like always. I'm going to show you exactly what knife I carried today, and that would be my GEC 71 bullnose. And this one actually is a little bit special. It is the 71 bullnose in, let's see, 01 tool steel, and I believe you can see that right there. And the second knife I carried is my trusty and well-loved S&G and Z-Wear, which you can see here. It's been in storage for a little bit, so the lube I put on here is leaking out a little bit, but it's nice and lubricated. Those are my two carry knives. Now let's go ahead and roll the intro. These two knives here, they're very, very similar, yet different. This knife I just got in the mail this week. This is a Sage 5. This knife I got a few weeks ago, maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago. And this is a Crewwear Paramilitary 3. Now, when you look at the specifications on both of these knives, you're going to see that they're pretty close. However, I'm going to kind of tell you my initial impressions of both knives. I've only had this knife for a couple of days, haven't even carried it. I've had this knife only for a month and a half or so, and I've only carried it a few times. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about the Sage series as a whole. So I'm going to move this knife out the way. There are 5 knives in the Sage series, and the Sage series are a series of knives that is a series of knives that is dedicated to the different types of lock mechanisms that have been developed here in modern folders. So there are 5 different Sage models, and the first Sage model was a liner lock version, and it was carbon fiber like this one is. The second version had a Reeve integral lock, also known as a frame lock, and that was a titanium knife, titanium on both sides, and like I said, it was a frame lock. The third type was a bolt action lock, and that one came in a few different scale materials, and it has a bolt action lock here, kind of like you see on the Mannix and the Mannix 2. Then on the Sage 4, there also were a few different variants of the Sage 4. That was a front lock, which was an ode to Al Mar, and it's kind of like a mid-lock or a back lock. There was a depression here where you could actuate the locking mechanism to unlock the knife or open it and it would lock. And this here, this is the Sage 5, and this is Spyderco's own compression lock. So that's where we get into the first similarity between the two knives that I'm going to talk about today. We have compression locks on both of these knives. So that automatically lends both of these knives to being ambidextrous. The other features of the knives, and I'm going to lay them out closed at first. The other features of the knives are they have an overall length, the Sage, of 7.125 inches. The Para 3 has an overall length of 7.27 inches. Both of the blades are 3 inches. The cutting length here on the Sage is 2.625 inches, whereas the cutting length on the Para 3 is 2.63. So very slight difference, but there is a difference. The blade thickness, so if you're looking at the blade this way, the blade thickness on both of these knives is 0.13 inches and 0.15 inches on the Para 3. This knife and this series of knives only so far have come in S30V. This knife, the Para 3, has come in S30V. This one is Crewwear. It comes in S110V. I believe there are at least one other sprint run that's scheduled to come out, and I'm sure if they've done one sprint run, they'll do several others. Also, this knife has come out in serrated variants. So there is what they consider a half serrated blade, but it's more around like 60% of the blade. The serrations run up to maybe around here. And then there is a fully serrated blade, which runs up to about here and covers about 75% of the blade. The handle length on the Sage series is 4.19 inches, or over here, the pair of three is 4.27 inches. The handle thickness, so if we're talking about the thickness this way, the handle thickness is 0.43 inches on the Sage 3, on the Sage 5, and it is 0.45 inches on the pair of three. This knife, this particular Sage, the Sage 5, is 3.2 ounces, and this pair of three is 3 ounces. So very similar, but different. Just in case anybody wants the specifications, I'm going to roll those. I'm going to put the piece of paper I'm reading from in front of the camera now so you can pause the camera. All right. If you wanted to see that, just pause it, rewind it, and pause it. Now I'm going to kind of talk about the differences and the similarities. So we've already talked about the fact that both of these knives have compression locks. I'm a big fan of the compression lock. The compression lock lends itself to being ambidextrous. It is not obtrusive, and usually the action on these knives are very good. You can also open and close these knives using one hand. So you see that there. This knife also is very fluid, and you can also flick it out like that. So this knife does lend, these knives, these compression lock knives, do lend themselves to one-handed opening and closing. Both of these knives have leaf type blade shapes. I wouldn't consider them both leaf blade shapes. This one I think is more of that classic leaf blade shape. This one here is a little bit of a different shape, maybe a modified leaf shape. The one thing I mentioned, starting with the blade, I find that the height of this hump on the back here, because of where the hole is located, I find that to be a little bit uncomfortable. For my large hand, if I'm holding a knife like I like to hold these knives, my thumb is kind of bent back on that hump. Whereas if I'm using the Sage 5, the hump is not as pronounced. And again, I would prefer to choke up, and my thumb is much more in a relaxed position. The handles, I don't find one more comfortable than the other. Again, these handle lengths are very, very comparable. They're also comparable thickness-wise. They're also comparable with the width of the handle this way. This knife does have a lanyard tube. This one does have a little lanyard tube here. I don't know if you can see it right there, right here. It's nowhere near as large as this one. This you could probably fit 550 cord folded over through here, no problem, without it being gutted. This, you might fit a single strand of 550 cord through here that's not gutted if you burn the end and feed it through carefully. Now, I'm not a lanyard guy, so that's not a deal breaker to me, but just if you're in the market, that's something to note. Also, the pair 3 has the 4-way adjustable pocket clip, so you can do tip up or tip down, left and on the right. Here, you can only put this in tip up, left or right. This clip will only fit here at the back of the handle. That leads me to a discussion about the clip. This one here has more of a traditional hourglass Spyderco pocket clip. Nothing really wrong with it. Some people talk about how much of the knife is going to be sticking out of your pocket. This here has the Spyderco wire clip, and this one will slide much more deeply into your pocket. Once in your pocket, something else to note is going to be, as I mentioned, the thickness of the knife with the difference of the humps. If you look at these two knives, you can see here the pair 3 sticks up significantly more than the Sage 5. You can see that hump right here. That is going to eat up some pocket space, and if you're reaching in and out of your pocket, I also keep my cell phone in the same pocket as my knife. This here I find a little bit more uncomfortable. Grip wise, I do prefer this grip over this. There is some texture here. I'll see if I can get that in the camera. There is some texture. However, it's still relatively slick. Also, another note is you can see here that carbon fiber is just on the surface. Right as soon as you get past the surface, all of this is just black G10. Here, the Para 3, this one happens to be gray, but the Para 3 is all G10 all the way through. I don't really have a preference for either or. If this was solid carbon fiber like the Para 2s, I think I would prefer this. However, this knife here would be my preference because of the texture. I can't really say that I would pick one knife over the other one at this point. I prefer the steel choice in this knife, preferentially the crew wear that I have in this knife. I do like the fact that both of them are tip up carry. I like the fact that this one has a lower profile in the handle, and also when you open it, so that way it's a little more comfortable in my hand. I personally prefer the hourglass clip if we're talking about factory clips, because you can purchase deep carry clips for this knife. But if we're talking factory clips, I tend to prefer the hourglass clip over the wire clip, just a personal preference. And that really covers it. I like some things about this knife. I like some things about this knife. They're very similar knives, yet very different. One of the other things that I'll mention, how I came across this knife. I actually have owned a Sage 1 and a Sage 2 in the past, or very early on in my knife collecting, but I ended up getting rid of them also very early on in my knife collecting. No specific reason, just things come and things leave. The Sage series has always been special to me because Spyderco donates roughly 5% of each purchase to the National Alzheimer's Association. My grandmother suffered from Alzheimer's dementia, and it really, if you know anything about the disease, it's an awful disease, and anything that's going to contribute to finding a cure for Alzheimer's, I'm going to support. So that's something that caused me to want to have another one of these knives in my collection. Really great knife, no negatives about it. Do I have some slight preferences towards the Para 3? Absolutely, but at this time I think it's too close to call. You guys tell me what you think about these two knives. I just appreciate you guys watching. I'll catch you in the next video. Let me know down below what you all would like to see in the next video. Thank you. Have a great weekend.